The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly, cold and unforgiving. Among the distant stars, a broken alien battleship drifted like a wounded beast. Its once powerful engines were silent, its hull covered in scorch marks from a recent battle. Inside, dim emergency lights flickered as the crew struggled to stay alive. Captain Relvek, a veteran of the Vakresh fleet, gritted his sharp teeth. His people, the Xelari, were proud warriors, but even they had limits. Their ship, the Vakresh, had barely survived an ambush by Drawl Reapers, ruthless space pirates who hunted the weak. Most of the crew was injured, and oxygen levels were dropping fast. With a heavy heart, Relvek activated the emergency beacon. It was a desperate move. The signal would broadcast their location to anyone nearby, friend or foe. But they had no choice. "Send out a universal distress call," he ordered. His communications officer hesitated. "Sir, what if the Drell find us again?" Relvek exhaled. "If we do nothing, we die anyway." The message was sent. "This is the Xelari battleship Vakresh. We are heavily damaged and require immediate assistance. Any nearby vessels, please respond." For hours, nothing happened. No response. No sign of help. Until Earth received the message. On Earth, the call for help. Inside the United Earth Space Command, UESC, headquarters, deep within the orbital station Titan 1, an alert rang through the command center. Officers rushed to their stations as a red light flashed on the main screen. "Commander, we've intercepted an alien distress signal," an officer reported. Commander Jace Havoc Carter leaned forward, scanning the data. At 32, Jace was already a legend, Earth's top fighter pilot, known for his unmatched skills in space combat. He had flown through asteroid fields, outmaneuvered enemy fleets, and survived impossible odds. "What's the situation?" he asked. "They're stranded near the outer rim of our system. No other factions have responded yet," the officer replied. Jace frowned. The Xelari were not allies of Earth, but they weren't enemies either. The Galactic Coalition had ignored their call. Typical bureaucratic nonsense, but Jace didn't care about politics. "Send a reply," Jace ordered. The officer hesitated. "Sir, are you sure? It's risky." Jace smirked. "They called for help. I'm answering." With that, he suited up, stepping into the cockpit of his sleek, experimental Raptor X fighter, the fastest ship in Earth's fleet, equipped with advanced AI, stealth capabilities, and weapons powerful enough to take on a fleet if needed. Engines roared to life as the hangar doors opened. Jace gripped the controls, adrenaline pumping through his veins. "Hang on, Xelari," he muttered. "Help is on the way." As he shot into the darkness of space, he had no idea that this mission would change everything. The Raptor X fighter shot through the black void of space, its sleek frame cutting through the silence like a knife. Inside, Commander Jace Havoc Carter checked his systems. Fuel, good. Weapons, armed. Shields, stable. His eyes flicked to the radar. No sign of enemies. Yet, the distress signal from the Vakresh was getting stronger. That meant he was close. He tapped a button on his console. "Xelari ship Vakresh. This is Commander Jace Carter of United Earth Space Command. I'm here to help." For a few seconds, there was no response. Just static. Then, "This is Captain Relvek." A deep, rough voice came through. "You are a human." Jace smirked. "Last I checked." Relvek's tone was sharp. "Why would a human answer our call? The Galactic Coalition ignored us. They do not care." Jace leaned back. "Yeah, well, I'm not the Coalition." A moment of silence. Then Relvek spoke again, more cautious this time. "Our ship is badly damaged. Life support is failing. We have many wounded, but be warned. If you try to take advantage of us, we will not hesitate to fight." Jace chuckled. "Relax, Captain. I didn't fly all the way out here just to pick a fight. Now, Let's get you patched up. The crippled ship. As the Vakresh came into view, Jace whistled. The auxiliary warship was in bad shape. Its once powerful hull was scorched and broken. Half of its engines were destroyed. Debris floated around it, pieces of its armor drifting through space. Jace carefully maneuvered his fighter, docking at the emergency airlock. He grabbed his helmet, secured his oxygen supply, and stepped inside. The airlock hissed open, revealing a group of armed Silari warriors. They were tall, with rough, armored skin and sharp, glowing eyes. Their weapons were trained on him. Jace raised his hands. Easy there. I'm the good guy. A large Silari stepped forward. Captain Relvek. He had deep scars across his face, his eyes full of suspicion. You are either brave or foolish, human, Relvek growled. Why help us? Jace shrugged. Because you needed help. Relvek studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. He turned to his crew. Lower your weapons. The warriors hesitated, then obeyed. Jace glanced around. The ship was worse on the inside. Flickering lights, damaged panels, and the air was thin. Oxygen levels were dangerously low. I need access to your systems, Jace said. If I can reroute power, I might keep your life support running long enough for a real fix. Relvek narrowed his eyes. You think you can repair a auxiliary warship? Jace grinned. I can try. But just as he started working, an alarm blared through the ship. Enemy ships detected. The Droll Reapers had found them. A sharp alarm echoed through the Vakresh. Red lights flashed as the damaged warship's warning system activated. Enemy ships detected. Jace snapped his head up, his instincts kicking in. He rushed to the nearest console and quickly scanned the radar. 3 ships. No 4. Relvek's expression darkened. Droll Reapers, he growled. They must have tracked our distress signal. Jace clenched his jaw. He had seen their kind before. Pirates, killers, scavengers. They didn't just destroy ships. They hunted survivors like prey. How long before they hit here? Jace asked. Auxiliary officer checked the readings. 3 minutes. Not good. Preparing for battle, Relvek turned to his crew. Arm the weapons. One of his officers hesitated. Sir, our weapons are damaged. Only 2 plasma turrets are still operational. Jace shook his head. That's not enough to hold them off. Relvek gritted his teeth. He knew it too. The Vakresh was weak. The Reapers would tear through them like vultures picking apart a dying beast. Jace tapped his communicator, linking to his ship's eye. Raptor X, initiate defense mode. A robotic voice responded. Acknowledged. Defense mode activated. Jace turned to Relvek. I have a fighter outside. Fast, armed, and ready. Let me take the fight to them while you keep your ship alive. Relvek stared at him. Alone. Jace smirked. Trust me. Relvek hesitated, then gave a slow nod. Go. Jace sprinted to the airlock, sealing his helmet. As the door hissed open, he launched himself into space and landed smoothly in his fighter's cockpit. The dogfight begins. As Jace's Raptor X powered up, the enemy ships arrived. 4 sleek, black fighters, their hulls marked with the skull-like insignia of the Droll Reapers. Jace gripped the controls. All right, let's dance. The enemy ships moved fast, spreading out to surround the Vakresh. One of them locked onto the damaged warship, charging its weapons. Jace pushed the throttle and shot forward at lightning speed. He opened fire, his plasma cannons ripping through the first enemy ship's shields. It exploded in a ball of fire. Not today, Jace muttered. The other Reapers turned toward him, weapons blazing. Jace rolled his fighter, dodging plasma bolts by inches. He dove, then pulled up sharply, outmaneuvering his pursuers. His voice chimed in. Incoming missile detected. Jace's eyes flicked to his scanner. One of the Reapers had locked onto them. He took a deep breath. Time to show them what a human pilot could do. He cut his thrusters, flipping his ship backward just as the missile closed in. At the last second, he dodged, letting the missile hit the enemy behind him instead. Boom! Another enemy down. But the fight wasn't over yet. The last two Reapers charged straight at him. Inside the Vakresh, Ralvek and his crew watched, stunned. One human, against an entire pirate attack. And somehow, he was winning. The battle raged on outside the Vakresh. Jace Carter, Earth's top fighter pilot, was locked in a high-speed dogfight with the last two Droll Reapers. His Raptor X weaved through space, dodging enemy fire and returning blasts with deadly precision. The Reapers were fast, but Jace was faster. His instincts were sharp, his reflexes lightning quick. Every move he made seemed calculated, as if he had known the enemy's next move before they did. Inside the Vakresh, Captain Ralvek watched in disbelief. He had never seen a human fight like this. Jace had already taken out two of the Droll ships, and now he was taking on the last two with ease. His ship moved with a grace that none of Ralvek's warriors could match. "Impressive," Ralvek muttered, his voice low. The auxiliary officers around him exchanged nervous glances. They had never trusted humans, had always believed they were weak, lacking the strength and resolve of the galaxy's other species. But now, watching Jace in action, they were starting to wonder if they had been wrong. Fighting side by side, Jace had one enemy in his sights, a sleek Reaper fighter, its weapons charging for another blast. The other was circling behind him, trying to get the perfect shot. "I can't keep dodging forever, Raptor X," Jace muttered to himself. He had to end this. He glanced at his weapons display. Only one missile left. He had to make it count. "Raptor X, target the lead ship's engine and lock on my final missile." "Target locked," the AI responded. The lead Droll fighter fired, its plasma bolt searing through the empty space. Jace veered sharply to the right, narrowly avoiding the shot. "Now," Jace shouted. The missile shot from his fighter, a glowing streak of light. It slammed into the Droll ship's engine, sending it spiraling out of control. Boom! The Reaper fighter exploded in a flash of flame and debris. But the last Reaper was still on his tail. It closed in fast. Jace's heart raced. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep evading. His shields were down to 30%, and his missile launcher was empty. He was running out of options. Just then, a familiar voice came through his comms. "Human, move aside." Ralvek's voice. Jace didn't have time to question it. The next moment, the Vakresh fired. The massive warship's plasma cannon, though weakened, blasted the final Reaper ship with pinpoint accuracy. The Droll ship exploded in a fiery cloud, its remains scattering through space. Jace let out a breath of relief as his fighter coasted to a halt. A new respect. Inside the Vakresh, Ralvek gave a nod of approval. He had seen the humans' abilities firsthand. Jace had saved them, not just with his skill, but with his courage. The auxiliary were proud warriors, but even they had to admit, human ingenuity had won the day. Jace's voice came through the comms again. "Nice shot, Captain." Ralvek smiled, though it was small and barely visible. "You're welcome, human." As the crew began to assess the damage and begin repairs, Ralvek stood tall. He glanced at Jace, who was still floating outside in his fighter. "Perhaps we underestimated you, human." Jace responded with a grin. "I told you I wasn't here to pick a fight." But now, Ralvek saw something different in Jace. He wasn't just a soldier. He was an ally. And in the vast expanse of space, that was worth more than anything. The Vakresh was finally silent. The last of the Droll Reaper ships was reduced to space debris, and the galaxy felt just a little bit safer. But the battle was far from over. Jace Carter sat inside his Raptor X, floating just outside the alien warship. His hands were still shaking from the adrenaline rush. He had done the impossible, taken down 4 enemy ships by himself. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. Inside the Vakresh, Captain Relvek stood before his crew, his face hard as stone. The ship was battered, its systems barely functioning. Their shields were down, and the crew had suffered heavy losses. But they were alive, thanks to Jace. "We owe him our lives," Relvek said to his officers, his voice rough with exhaustion. "But I fear this is only the beginning. The Droll Reapers are not the only threat in this part of the galaxy." The crew fell silent. Everyone knew the stakes. The Xilari were a proud species, but they had been weakened in recent years. The Droll were just one problem. There were others, worse and more dangerous. A new challenge. Jace's comms buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Relvek. "Human, we need to talk." Jace sighed and opened the comms. "What now, Captain?" Relvek's voice was sharp. "We've been followed." Jace raised an eyebrow. "By who?" "By something far worse than the Droll." Before Jace could respond, the radar on his display lit up with multiple signatures, large, moving fast. His eyes narrowed as the enemy ships came into view. They weren't Droll. These were massive warships, cloaked in dark armor and with engines that burned like stars. Jace's heart skipped a beat. He had seen these ships before, in reports, in the files about the galaxy's most dangerous threats. They were the Krath, a ruthless, ancient warlord faction feared across the galaxy. They didn't just conquer, they destroyed, wiped out entire species for sport. Jace's hands tightened on the controls. "Well, this is just getting better," he muttered to himself. Relvek's voice crackled in his ear again. "These are Krath warships, human. We cannot fight them alone." "I'm not planning to," Jace replied, his voice steady. "But I'll do my part." The battle intensifies. The Krath warships moved like shadows, circling the Vakresh with deadly intent. They had come to finish what the Droll Reapers started. And this time, they wouldn't show mercy. Jace punched in the coordinates for a high-speed intercept. He pulled the Raptor X into position, his heart pounding. The Krath ships were formidable, but Jace had one advantage. They hadn't anticipated a human pilot to be in the mix. Jace flipped a switch, activating the experimental weapon on his fighter. It was a last-ditch effort, a one-time use only. The EMP pulse would disable enemy shields, leaving them vulnerable to attack. He wasn't sure it would work, but he had no choice. He launched himself into the fray, weaving between the enemy ships, dodging their plasma blasts. The Krath ships fired relentlessly, but Jace's movements were unpredictable, impossible to anticipate. The Raptor X danced in the vacuum of space, like a predator toying with its prey. Jace fired the EMP pulse, watching as the Krath warship's shields flickered and dropped. Now it was his turn. Jace locked onto the nearest Krath ship, his weapons systems humming. He fired everything he had: the plasma cannons, the missile launcher, and the burst pulse. The Krath ship took the full force of the attack. It exploded in a massive fireball, debris scattering in all directions. The turning point. Inside the Vakresh, Relvek watched in awe as Jace destroyed the first Krath warship. Impossible. He's fighting the Krath alone. Relvek whispered to himself. But this was far from over. The remaining Krath ships moved in, and Jace knew they would be back for him. But this time, he wasn't alone. The Vakresh's weapon systems hummed to life. "Captain," Jace called, his voice steady. "Let's finish this." Relvek gave a nod. "Ready when you are, human." The battle had only just begun, and Jace had no intention of backing down. The vacuum of space was deafeningly silent, but inside the Vakresh, the tension was palpable. The Krath warships circled like hungry predators, their weapons primed for the kill. The Xilari crew, battered and exhausted, had repaired as much as they could, but their ship was still on the brink of collapse. It was clear now. They couldn't win this battle alone. Jace sat in the cockpit of his Raptor X, the cold of space biting at his skin through his suit. He stared out at the 4 remaining craft ships. They were massive, towering structures of dark metal, with engines that burned brighter than stars. It was a fight Jace had no business taking on, but here he was. He knew the odds. He knew the risks. And yet the thought of failure didn't even cross his mind. The comms crackled in his ear. "Human, we must work together if we are to survive." It was Captain Relvek. His voice was surprisingly calm, considering the situation. "You think," Jace replied, his lips curling into a wry smile. Relvek's deep voice came through again. "I have reprogrammed our weapon systems. I will coordinate our attack." Jace gripped the controls tighter. "Good. I'm not going to wait for them to make the first move." He powered up the Raptor X, pushing the throttle forward. The fighter shot toward the Krath warships, its engines roaring to life. Jace's mind was sharp, his focus unwavering. The Krath ships were formidable, but they hadn't seen a human pilot like him. The first strike. The Krath warships were closing in. Their weapons blazed with deadly intent, lighting up the darkness of space. But Jace was faster. He weaved through their fire, dodging plasma blasts with ease. The Krath ships fired again, but Jace was already moving. He was a blur of motion, unpredictable and dangerous. Relvek's voice echoed through the comms once again. "Now, human, fire at the lead ship's engines." Jace didn't hesitate. He aimed his plasma cannons and fired. The blast hit the lead Krath warship squarely in the engine. The ship staggered, its shields flickering. The Krath ship began to lose speed, unable to keep up with the sudden damage. "Got it," Jace shouted, a surge of adrenaline rushing through him. The Krath ship's engines sparked and sputtered. A huge explosion ripped through its hull. But there was no time to celebrate. The remaining Krath ships were closing in, furious and ready to destroy him. The turning point. Inside the Vakresh, the crew cheered at the sight of the first Krath ship going down. But they knew this wasn't over. The remaining ships were more than capable of retaliation. They needed to act fast. Relvek's voice came through once more. "We are ready, human. Let us finish this." Jace nodded. The fight had only just begun. He couldn't afford to let his guard down now. With a swift move, Jace dove into the next wave of Krath warships, his fighter blazing through the cold void of space. He fired another round of plasma blasts, this time hitting one of the Krath ship's weapon systems. The Krath warship shuddered, sparks flying from its damaged hull. It wasn't enough to destroy the ship, but it was enough to disable it for a few precious seconds. "Now's our chance, Captain," Jace yelled. Inside the Vakresh, Relvek gave the order. The warship's ion cannon powered up, and with a single concentrated blast, it fired directly at the Krath ship Jace had disabled. The blast hit its weak point, and the Krath warship exploded in a violent fireball. 2 down. A new alliance. The battle was far from over, but Jace felt a sense of accomplishment. The Vakresh had held its ground, and now the Krath warships were in disarray. "Human, I must admit, I underestimated you." Relvek's voice came through, and Jace could hear the grudging respect in it. Jace smirked. "Glad I could surprise you, Captain." The Vakresh fired another round, sending a third Krath ship into retreat. Only one Krath ship remained, and the odds were now on their side. Jace wasn't done yet. He pushed the Raptor X to its limits, speeding toward the final Krath ship. His weapons systems charged. With one final strike, the Krath ship exploded into a burst of flames and debris. The battle was over. Jace exhaled, his heart still racing. The cost of victory. Inside the Vakresh, Relvek turned to his crew. "We have survived, thanks to the human." The crew of the Vakresh looked at Jace with newfound respect. They had seen the human fight, and they had seen him win. For the first time, they realized humans were not weak. They were warriors in their own right. Jace smiled, his eyes focused on the stars ahead. Let's hope the next battle isn't as hard as this one. Ralvek didn't answer immediately, but Jace saw a change in the alien leader. He wasn't just a stranger anymore. Jace had earned his respect, and that respect would carry them through whatever came next. The stars outside the Vakresh glowed like distant jewels, but inside the ship, the mood was far from calm. The battle was over, but the scars of the fight remained. The alien crew worked tirelessly, repairing what they could, but the damage was severe. Jace sat in the cockpit of his Raptor X, his fingers still aching from the intense battle. He had fought hard, done what he could, but even he could feel the weight of the battle's aftermath. The Krath were gone, but not without leaving a mark. The Vakresh was barely hanging together, and the crew had no time to waste. Another enemy could be on the way at any moment. Inside the Vakresh, Captain Ralvek paced back and forth. His mind was already focused on the next move. Despite their victory, they had little time to celebrate. "Human, we need a plan." Jace's voice crackled through the comms. "I agree, Captain. But we can't keep running forever. We need to find a safe place to regroup." Ralvek paused, considering Jace's words. "The closest planet is Vasari. It's a neutral system. Safe, but it is far." Jace nodded. Vasari was the perfect choice. It wasn't controlled by any major faction, a perfect place to lay low for a while. But there was one problem. They wouldn't make it there on their own. The gamble. Jace's thoughts raced as he looked at the damaged warship. He knew they were running out of options. If they didn't get help soon, they would be easy targets. There was only one choice. Jace took a deep breath. He opened a secure line to Vakresh's command deck. "Captain, I have an idea. It's risky, but it might just work." Ralvek's voice came through, skeptical. "Go on, human. What's your plan?" "We need to find the nearest trade route and contact the Galactic Coalition. If we can get help, they can tow us to Vasari. It's our best shot at surviving this." Ralvek's eyes narrowed. "You want us to trust the Coalition? They've ignored our distress calls before. Why would they help us now?" Jace's voice was calm but firm. "Because the Krath are a threat to everyone, Captain. If we don't stand together, we'll all fall." Ralvek thought for a long moment. "And what do you propose?" "I'll go alone. I'll reach out to the Coalition and make sure they know the Krath are a threat to them too." Jace knew it was a dangerous move. The Galactic Coalition didn't always look favorably on humans, let alone one who was involved in an alien conflict. But he didn't have a choice. Ralvek hesitated. "You would go alone. You are a valuable asset. It's too risky." Jace smiled slightly. "I'm used to risky. Besides, I trust my ship and my skills. It's the only way." A test of trust. Inside the Vakresh, the crew was nervous. They had seen Jace's ability in battle, but this was something else. They were asking him to put his life in the hands of the Galactic Coalition, a faction that had already shown little interest in their survival. But Jace was confident. He knew he was taking a gamble, but he was ready. The Raptor X hummed to life once again, and Jace began his course toward the nearest trade route. The stars stretched out before him, and the cold, vast emptiness of space felt oddly peaceful. He didn't have time to think about the dangers ahead. As he entered the trade route, Jace opened a secure communication channel to the Galactic Coalition. "This is Commander Jace Carter of United Earth Space Command." The voice on the other end was cold and professional. "Commander Carter, state your business." "I have urgent information regarding the Krath. I need you to listen. The Vakresh, an alien ship, has been attacked. The Krath are organizing in our space. They'd pose a threat to everyone. If we don't work together, they'll destroy us all." There was a long pause. Then the voice on the other end responded. "We will send a fleet to assist. Stand by for coordinates." Jace let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. It had worked. The waiting game. Jace's heart raced, but he knew this wasn't over. He still had to make sure the Galactic Coalition was true to their word. Meanwhile, back on the Vakresh, Relvek watched the stars in silence. He knew the human had a plan, but he wasn't sure what would come of it. He was beginning to understand that humans were unpredictable, and sometimes that was a strength. "Captain, we got a response," one of the officers said. Relvek turned to see the message. "Assistance is on the way. Coordinates to follow." For the first time, Relvek allowed himself to believe there might be hope. "We may survive this, human." But even as they began their repairs, they all knew the hardest battles were still to come. The cold silence of space was broken only by the hum of the Raptor X engines as Jace Carter piloted the sleek fighter towards the rendezvous coordinates. His mind raced as the stars blurred past him. He had successfully contacted the Galactic Coalition, but the true test was whether they would actually come through. He couldn't afford to think about failure. The Vakresh and its crew were depending on him. In the cockpit, Jace scanned the radar one last time. No signs of craft ships. For now, they were safe, but he knew it wouldn't last. The Krath warlords didn't let their prey escape so easily. The comms buzzed in his ear. It was Captain Relvek. "Human, I don't trust the Coalition." Jace let out a soft chuckle. "Join the club, Captain. But they're our best shot. They can get us to safety." Relvek's voice came through, filled with a mix of skepticism and grudging respect. "You've led us through the worst. We're willing to trust you, this time." "Thanks, Captain. But trust me, the hardest part is still ahead." The Coalition's arrival. Jace's eyes never left the view outside the Raptor X cockpit. His hands moved automatically, guiding the ship towards the Vakresh. It was difficult to shake the feeling of impending danger, as if something big was just waiting to happen. Suddenly, the radar flickered. Multiple ships appeared on the screen. For a moment, Jace's breath caught in his throat, but then the ship's markings became clear. They were Coalition warships. The familiar voice of the Coalition commander came through the comms. "Commander Carter, we have arrived. Prepare to dock." Jace let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thanks for showing up, Commander." The warships moved into position around the Vakresh, creating a protective barrier against any further threats. The Krath were no longer a danger for the moment, but that could change in the blink of an eye. The tension of waiting. Inside the Vakresh, the crew worked quickly to stabilize the ship. Wounded officers were moved to the medical bay, and the remaining crew members patched up the damaged systems as best they could. But the feeling of relief was short-lived. Every eye was on the Raptor X as Jace slowly approached the docking port. The Coalition's fleet was here, but was it too late? Relvek stood at the command center, his arms crossed. The harsh reality of their situation weighed on him. He had seen enough war to know that allies could turn against you in an instant. Yet something about Jace's leadership felt different. He was no ordinary human. "You trust them?" one of the officers asked, glancing at Relvek. Relvek didn't answer immediately. He only nodded. For now. The docking process was slow, but it wasn't long before the Raptor X settled into the Vakresh's docking bay. The air was filled with the sound of engines powering down, and then it was silent again. Jace stepped out of the cockpit, his boots making a soft thud against the metal floor. He took a deep breath, then turned to face the crew. "We've made it." But Relvek didn't look relieved. "We'll see how long this alliance lasts." Jace's lips curled into a smile. "We'll make it last as long as we can." A moment of calm. For now, the Vakresh was safe. The Coalition had arrived with the necessary resources to repair the ship and get it back to a safe zone. But Jace knew better than to think they had won. The galaxy was vast, and threats were always lurking. The Krath had only been one danger. They were already planning for the next. Jace looked out the view screen, his eyes scanning the stars. They had survived, but only by the thinnest margin. "Where to next, human?" Relvek asked, stepping up beside him. Jace turned to look at the alien leader, wherever the Coalition decides to send us. But I have a feeling we haven't seen the last of the craft. Relvek's eyes narrowed. We'll be ready. For a brief moment, Jace felt the weight of the war they were all about to face. But there was no turning back. The fight had only just begun. The Vakresh floated in space, its damaged hull now being carefully repaired by the Coalition fleet. The warships around it moved in synchronized patterns, forming a protective circle to keep any threats at bay. The atmosphere aboard the alien ship was tense, despite the temporary safety they had found. The crew was still on edge, knowing the craft could return at any moment. Jace Carter stood near the ship's observation window, staring out into the endless void of space. He had been through countless battles, but this one had been different. The stakes were higher, the enemies were more dangerous, and for the first time, Jace had truly realized the cost of his actions. He wasn't alone for long. Captain Relvek approached, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silence. He stood beside Jace, gazing out at the Coalition fleet. The Coalition didn't hesitate to send their ships. Relvek remarked, his tone uncertain. But can we trust them for the long haul? Jace didn't look at the captain. He wasn't entirely sure himself, but there was something different about the way they had responded. They didn't leave him stranded. We'll see. But right now, it's enough. Jace's voice was steady, though his mind was already racing with what lay ahead. He had learned to trust his instincts in battle, and right now, his gut told him that they had earned a little peace, but only a little. The Coalition's offer. It wasn't long before a Coalition officer approached the Vakresh. A young woman in a crisp uniform. She carried herself with authority. Her eyes studied Jace and Relvek, calculating them as if they were the next challenge. Commander Carter, Captain Relvek, she said, nodding in acknowledgement. The Galactic Coalition has agreed to a temporary alliance. We'll escort you to Vasari, as promised, but you will remain under our protection until further notice. Relvek narrowed his eyes. Protection? From what? From the craft. From anyone who wishes to exploit your situation. The Coalition believes that your people may be valuable allies in the coming war. Jace could sense the underlying tension in the room. The Coalition wasn't offering help out of kindness. They had their own agenda. The craft weren't their only concern, and they knew it. There were forces far worse lurking in the dark corners of space. We're not your pawns. Relvek's voice was cold. Jace turned to the captain, placing a hand on his shoulder. We don't have to be. But we also can't do this alone. The officer eyed Jace for a moment, then gave a small nod. Very well. The fleet will escort you to Vasari. Once there, you'll be free to make your own decisions. But know this. We have our eyes on you. Relvek stood tall, his pride evident. We don't need your watchful eyes. But we will accept your help. For now. A new beginning. As the Coalition fleet moved into position, Jace stood silently on the deck of the Vakresh, watching the alien ships work in perfect synchronization. The vastness of space felt different now. There were allies here, and yet Jace couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking on a thin line. The Vakresh had barely made it out alive. The crew had come close to defeat, and Jace knew they still weren't out of danger. But for now, they had a fragile hope. They had allies, and more importantly, they had a chance to rebuild. Relvek came up beside him again, this time without words. The silence between them spoke volumes. The alien captain had seen humanity's resolve in battle. He had seen Jace fight, not for glory, but for survival. For all of them. Jace turned to the captain. We'll get to Vasari. Then we'll decide what's next. Relvek nodded, his expression unreadable. But in his eyes, there was a flicker of something new. Trust, respect, maybe. The long road ahead. As the Vakresh moved toward the planet Vasari, Jace thought about the future. The craft would return, and with them, more dangers were sure to follow. But for the first time in a long time, Jace wasn't alone. He had earned the respect of the Silari crew. He had earned their trust. And maybe, just maybe, humanity had earned its place in this vast, unpredictable galaxy. But as the stars stretched out before him, Jace couldn't help but wonder, was this just the beginning? The Vakresh slowly drifted towards Vasari, a neutral planet known for its trading routes and lack of allegiance to any major faction. The coalition ships formed a protective line around the alien vessel, ensuring no unwanted visitors could interrupt their passage. For now, the craft were the least of their concerns, but Jace Carter knew that peace was only temporary. The stars outside the ship glimmered like scattered diamonds. Jace couldn't help but feel the weight of the vast emptiness surrounding them. He had always been a fighter, someone who thrived in the chaos of combat, but now, for the first time, he faced the reality of a future unknown. The fight was over, for now, but what lay ahead was uncertain. Inside the Vakresh, things were quieter than usual. The crew had completed the repairs, and their ship now looked more stable, though still battered. The auxiliary officers were no longer the cold strangers they had once been. They had seen what humanity could do, and they were beginning to understand. Jace sat at the observation window, watching the planet Vasari grow closer with every passing second. His thoughts raced. His mission had started as a simple rescue mission, but it had turned into something far larger, something more complicated. The coalition was on their side for now, but the question lingered. Would they always be allies, or would the tides of war shift once again? The alien woman's proposal. The door to the observation deck opened, and Captain Relvek stepped inside. He didn't speak at first, only stood beside Jace, gazing out at the blue planet below. The quiet between them was different now, comfortable, even. Jace could sense the alien's respect, and maybe even something more. "We are close to Vasari," Relvek said, breaking the silence. "What will we do once we arrive?" Jace turned to look at him. "We'll see what the coalition wants, and then we make our move." Relvek nodded slowly. "I thought you might say that." He paused, then added, "You know, human, you have earned our respect. But you must also understand that your fight is not ours alone. There are others in this galaxy who have suffered at the hands of the Krath. You may need more than just the coalition's help." Jace raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" The captain hesitated. "An alliance, not just with us, but with others. There are species in the galaxy who have been pushed to the brink by the Krath. If we join forces, we may stand a better chance at survival." Jace was silent for a moment, considering the proposal. It wasn't a bad idea, but it would mean trusting more than just the auxiliary. They would need to unite many different species, some of whom had long-standing distrust of humans. The question was whether they could do it, and whether the other species would accept them as equals. "I'll think about it," Jace finally said, "but I'm not ready to sign anyone up for anything just yet." Relvek nodded. "Understood. We will wait until you are ready." The arrival at Vasari. As the Vakresh entered orbit around Vasari, Jace felt a strange calm wash over him. The planet was peaceful, its surface dotted with cities and spaceports, ideal for trade and negotiations. The coalition ships were already making contact with local authorities, establishing a temporary base of operations. "We're here, human." Relvek's voice came through once more. The next chapter of this story begins now. Jace stood up from the observation window, his gaze fixed on the planet below. He had no idea what would happen next. Would the coalition be true to their word, or would their alliance dissolve when the Krath were no longer the immediate threat? Could the humans and Silari build something that lasted? As the Vakresh slowly made its descent into the atmosphere, Jace made a quiet promise to himself. He would do everything he could to make sure humanity had a place in this galaxy. They might not have been the most powerful, but they had something no one else did: resolve. The unknown stretched out before them, vast and full of possibilities. And as Jace stood there, waiting for the future to unfold, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. The end.